So if you're uncomfortable with writing a bio sketch because you don't think you have anything to say, please, please, I beg you, watch the online video. She has great ideas for how to flesh out your bio sketch if you're feeling a little intimidated. So that is kind of what to expect, what's coming next. If you guys can mute your line, that would be great. It's either *6 or hit the mute button on your phone, whatever you prefer. But remember to unmute yourself if you have a question. I'll also have my cell phone here, so if you call in, if you're intimidated to ask Paula a question, which I think when you guys meet Paula, you won't be worried. But if you are, you can always text me your question at 803-517-0992. And Paula, as always, love having you with us. This is Paula Gregory. She's down at Louisiana, and when I met Paula, I first of all went out to dinner with her and had a great time, and then I realized she was this powerhouse in helping people to get those first early career funding opportunities. And she knows how to fit a grant to you, so I think that she's just the perfect person to have this discussion with us today. So Paula, I'm going to put your slides up, and I will hit next whenever you tell me to. You're away you go.
Awesome.
Thank you, ma'am.
Well, I'm so glad to be here, you guys. And I'm taking a talk that we've given at the Association for Clinical Translational Science to junior faculty who are interested in K awards. And I kind of modified it because all of you are clinical and you're all faculty, so you're not postdocs. So trying to make it more appropriate. Next slide. So the first thing is, what is a K award? And the K award is a career development award. And these are designed to provide support for either a senior postdoc, and that's one that you wouldn't worry about, or for a faculty. Here's the key thing to remember. The K award is designed to promote career development. So it's not just I'm a junior person and I have an idea for some research. It's I'm a junior person and I know how to do this, but I need to learn this in order to do my spectacular research project. So it's really important throughout this that I'm going to keep reminding you, you have to identify the thing you need to learn. If you don't need to learn anything, and I had someone who had 37 papers published as a postdoc, and she told everybody that about 20 times. And so the reviewers said, well, if you have 36 papers, you don't need a K award. You're grown up. Go get a big grant. I don't think y'all are all grown ups yet, so we're not going to worry about that. Next. So the advantages of participating in a K award is there's a higher number of publications that people get when they're on the K. So it builds up your CV, your bio sketch, for when you want to apply for a bigger grant. And the other thing to remember is all of these Ks are mentored. So you're working with a more senior faculty who's helping you learn those things that you need to learn in order to be successful. The people who get K awards had significantly higher success rates when they do go to apply for big grants. And when you follow these people over time, the idea is hopefully they gain some skills that they needed in order to do research better, and then they have more success applying to NIH for support. Next slide. So one of the most important things in strategizing for your K award is strategizing. It's great you've got a good project and a good idea, and maybe you've got a mentor. But one of the things you want to make sure you do is you apply for the right kind of K from the right institute. And there's a couple different ways you can go about this strategizing, but I think the easiest one is to start with looking at the success rates of the Ks, from different institutes. And you can get that right off of the NIH webpage. It's right there's the address at the bottom. And I wouldn't go back, this database goes back to, I don't know, like 1990 or something, I don't know. But I would go back maybe 4 years and look at the same Ks or maybe 2 Ks from the same institute and compare their success rate over the years, maybe for 4 years or 5 years. But I wouldn't go back any further than that because, you know, the economy has a big impact on the NIH budget, which has a big impact on what gets funded. And so there are fluctuations sometimes in the success rates. Next slide. But what you'll end up seeing on that is it starts with K01, which you guys don't need to worry about. It's for basic scientists, and goes up through K99. And it goes K by K and institute by institute, how many applications, how many were awarded, and what % that success rate was. The trick is sometimes you can look like it's a great success rate, like right here, NIGMS and the KOAT. 7 applied and 6 were funded. But so that gave it an 85% success rate. But that's only 6 grants that were funded. When you look at other institutes have much higher numbers, they may have a lower percent. So again, the strategizing is not only looking at the different Ks and the different institutes, but making sure that you are not just, you know, where you're going to be 1 of 2 or something. Or worse, Genome, my home institute, there were 3 applications for a KOAT in 2016, and there were 0 that were awarded. So what happened that year? Don't know. So you might not want to apply to Genome. The other reason to look at this is you may have a project that qualifies for 2 different kinds of Ks. Let's say you're a physician, and some of what you want to analyze is in the lab, like gene expression, and some of what you want to analyze is with the patients, looking at correlating their genotypes with the gene expression or exomic sequencing or something like that. So it could kind of go either lab-based, lab-heavy, or it could go patient-heavy. And that's one where you can decide between 2 different Ks. You might also have a project that could go between 2 different institutes. So let's say you're looking at childhood, childhood brittle bone, you know, osteogenesis imperfecta. You might apply to child health, or you might apply to NIAMS, which is the Institute for Musculoskeletal. So again, you got to figure out the Ks and possibly the institute, and part of that needs to be in consideration of who gives money, you know, who's got a better success rate. Next slide. There are 14 different types of Ks. Guess what? I'm the only one who has to know about all 14 of them. You only have to know about 2, the KOAT and the K23. And these Ks can support both clinicians and basic scientists, but we're going to be talking about support for clinicians. Next slide. So the idea of these career awards is to lead to independent research career and to give you additional training and mentoring. And most of them are going to give you 3 to 5 years of partial salary support and some research funding. And one thing I don't want to forget, because I'm not sure it's on this slide, the 2 Ks that we are talking about, KO8 and K23, for the major institutes, they've come up with a new thing. It's very recent. If you have a KO8 or a K23, you then can compete for an R03, which is a small 2-year grant, just to give you extra money for the research itself. And that's an acknowledgement that it's expensive to do clinical research, and so the mentor may not have enough money to cover all the expenses, and the K award really doesn't have a ton of research money in it either. So that's something to remember, because it's kind of a bonus. It's exclusive. Only people with the Ks can compete for those R03s. So you're not competing against everybody in the world, just a couple other sharp cookies. Next slide. So the NIH has a bunch of different programs designed to help undergrads, designed to help pre-docs, support them, designed to support postdocs and clinical research. They actually just came out with something really new that's just for residency support of research, and then for your early research career, which is the Ks. Next slide. So let's talk about the KOAT. The KOAT is a Mentored Clinical Scientist Research Career Development Award. This is kind of the physician in the lab. If more of the project is something that might be done where you're going to learn more, and I don't want to just say lab skills, but do more of the research in the lab and less of it with patients. Even if you're recruiting your own patients, if you would be analyzing the samples, that might qualify you for the KOAT, especially if you don't, say, have a background. So let's say you're really interested in exomic sequencing or whole genome sequencing, and your KOAT would be not only in a specific disease that you're interested in, but maybe you would, the thing you need to learn is some bioinformatics so you can interpret that data. That's where you would put in for a KOAT. And you would emphasize that, you know, I'm really good at taking care of sick kids and I'm really interested in this rare disease, but what I really want to do is get deeper into analyzing the molecular basis of this and learn some of these molecular skills. Next slide. The K23 is patient-oriented research career development. So this can be, you know, we're going to look at, you know, deal more with the patient. And again, a lot of projects that clinicians will do could go either way. And so you really need to, you know, figure out where, we're not saying you're going to learn more about how to deal with patients, but how to do clinical research, how to set up a clinical protocol or a clinical trial. Those are the kinds of things that would go into training you with a K23. Next slide. So important thing is to make sure you're still eligible. You need a terminal doctoral degree that's clinical, and DO and RD, those types of degrees count, but if you're not sure, all you have to do is look at the what's called a parent announcement, the announcement that the NIH puts out with all the rules, and those just came out for the K Awards last week, a renewal. So every 3 or 4 years they come out with a new list of rules, et cetera. Of course, it's the government. Anyway, most of the time they don't want you to have more than 4 or 5 years past your last training. So if you finished your residency or your fellowship, you're in fellowship, then you definitely qualify. U.S. citizen or green card. Not eligible if you have had an R01. Shocking as that might be. Just kidding. The mentor, you want to pick mentor, and we're saying mentor, but really it's mentors. But you need somebody on there. You may need somebody who has a really good track record clinically with this disease, but also a mentor who has a track record of getting grant funding. And you want to think about, what are the things I want to learn? If you want to learn bioinformatics, one of your mentors should be somebody who does bioinformatics. And that way it looks like you're really going to learn something. So the mentor needs a strong track record in getting funding, but also a strong track record in having mentored faculty. You know, I've trained some of these fellows. They've gone on to be faculty members. They're doing research, blah, blah, blah. Next slide. Always remember there's other career development awards depending on the type of disease that you're interested in. Some of the American Cancer Society, American Heart, they all have these junior faculty awards. The problem is those foundations have they have less money than the federal government, and so they're going to be more competitive. So they're going to be able to fund less people. So, but there's nothing that says you can't send the same application to both. You can't have both, but send something you wrote up for NIH, send it also to the American Diabetes Association and see which one you get. Next slide. All right, so the best advice we can give you is once you kind of start to narrow down which institute you think you want and which kind of K you want, talk to the person at that institute. The people who are the K expert for each institute are listed on a big table that is linked out of the program announcement that just came out last week. Next slide.
First, I get to make a interjection here, Paula. So everyone knows that every year, when at the end of the year I say, what's the most important thing you learned? This slide wins every year. People that contact the program officers get their grants funded because they know what to apply for. So please, if you're even thinking about a grant, get a hold of your program officer. If they're not nice to you, call me. I'll find you another one. We will find you help. Please, I beg you, call your program officers. That is the #1 key to success in this cohort for the last now 3rd year that I have heard. So please, 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 I beg you, do this. Thank you, Paula.
Absolutely. And they are, I have to say, the program officers for the K Awards are some of, in general, not always, in general, the nicest people, because they are there to try to foster people's interest in doing research, particularly clinicians. And at this point in time, the NIH is focusing a lot of money and resources on trying to get clinician researchers. So you guys couldn't have picked a better time to be applying for these kinds of grants. Okay, let's see what's next. All right, tip 1, use the most recent instructions. So make sure, like I said, the program announcement for the K Awards came out last week. All you have to do is go to nih.gov, that's the NIH webpage, and in the search thing, put KOAT or K23. It will take you to the latest, greatest application guide. But make sure that you read all the fine print, because there are things you're allowed to pay for and things you're not allowed to ask money for, et cetera, et cetera. So you want to make sure you stay within the rules. So read the instructions. Kind of like putting together furniture from IKEA. Make sure you read the instructions. Oh, that's right. IKEA doesn't have instructions. I'm just kidding. Next slide. So the parts of the K Award are the candidate information and your career development plan, your specific aims, your training and responsible conduct of research, your plan for mentoring, and the plans and statements, these are the letters from the mentors, and a description of the institutional environment, and that bio sketch that she just talked about. The thing that you're going to be scored on is you as a candidate. Is this someone who can do this work? And you have to convince the reviewers that, yes, indeed, you are that person. B, the mentors. Are these people going to be able to help you? The research proposal, the research itself, is it reasonable? And the career development plan. Okay? Next slide. All right, so those main sections, candidate information, research plan, you have to have training in responsible conduct of research, and it's very detailed what they want to see, what they want you to say. So you, again, read the instructions. The institutional environment. You can get that from pretty much any business manager within your institution. They should, pretty much every school has some boilerplate language about we have these resources and this thing and blah, blah, blah. The institutional commitment to the candidate. If you're willing to write a K Award, you should be getting a letter of support from the dean, and you're going to write that letter. You might even get, if there's like a vice chancellor or a chancellor or whatever. My chancellor writes letters for me all the time. Why? Because I write them. And then we get the money. So if you write a draft of the letter and ask them, and it doesn't have to say I'm giving him money. It's just we have a lot of faith in this person, and having this protected time is going to allow them to develop their career. They're the best, blah, blah, blah. That's going to be really important. Next slide. So the candidate, the applicant's background and goals for the training. So there's 3 sections to what I call the career development component. The first is the candidate's background. Y'all, this is where, okay, you just heard me say y'all because I'm from the South. This is where it's really important. We don't want to hear your bio sketch all over again. I'm a reviewer. I just read your bio sketch, and now you're going to tell me that you published this paper and published that paper and you did this thing and that thing. No. Here is where you convince the reviewers that you are, that you're a real person, you're a 3-dimensional person. How did you get interested in clinical research? Or how did you get interested in the disease that you want to study? I had one of my K awardees, the first sentence said something about I've always been interested in genetics because of blah, blah, blah. And the second sentence said, I'm the first person in my family to graduate college. Well, that tells me as a reviewer, this person's really a go-getter. If they're the first person, and he was actually doing a postdoc at NIH, he's really successful. This tells me a lot about the person before I even read the rest. And then he went on to say which different events or courses or mentors had gotten him interested in kind of what his path was to his interest. So we don't just want to, rehash the whole bio sketch here. I went to school here, I went to school there, blah, blah, blah. Add some personality to this. Make them see why you are such a valuable person and that you are going to work hard and you're going to make this work. Your goals and objectives. This can be half a page. However, I think the most effective ones I've seen that are half a page just say, in order to become independent, I feel I need to achieve the following goals. And they just kind of list them out. I need to get better at practice at mentoring. I need practice at learn more about grant writing and scientific writing and communication. I want to learn bioinformatics and become more adept at using bioinformatic tools. Then in the career development activities or career training part, you take those specific things that you said are your goals. In order to get, my training in grant writing, I'm going to take a course, I'm going to do so-and-so and so-and-so. So you take each of those goals and then you flesh out a plan for how you're going to achieve those goals. So very straightforward. I'm a great person. I want to do these 3 or 4 major things. These are my big goals. And under those goals, where's my plan to get there? Now, your plan, don't make it too complicated. Really everybody knows. You're already seeing patients, et cetera. You don't want to say, I'm going to go off and do blah, blah, blah. Make it something realistic, whether it's online courses, whether it's, maybe a week-long course that you might go to, but try to kind of make sure that it has, if you're going to take a course, what's the course number? What's the course name? Who offers it? Where's it from? If you just say, I'm going to take a course in something, well, so what? Is that real? So give it some concreteness, I guess is the right word. And I think those are the main things that we're looking for. Then you want to end the career development, and I'll show you later, with a timeline that shows not only your scientific goals for your research and the timing of those, but also when you're going to be doing these activities, the training activities. Next slide. Ooh. All right, so you want to describe your training that's enabled you, what's your background, and what are the skills you already have. I did a fellowship in so-and-so, and now what I really need to do is blah, blah, blah. And let's hit it again. Describe your evidence of productivity. So maybe you don't have a ton of first author papers, but you have presented at, major things. You've won awards as the residency presentation or whatever. Bring those things out. Next. Describe any formal training. So there are, if you got an MPH in epidemiology, because that's what you want to apply to this. If you've got a master's in clinical research, which some schools offer that, you want to put that in there. How all of that contributed and built the foundation for you to be able to do this research. All right, next slide. Okay, so what are your short-term goals, over the course of the K? And those are the things I talked about, very concrete. I want to, increase my ability to mentor or whatever. I'm going to bring kids into the lab, students in the lab, whatever. Next, why do you need the award? This award is going to give me the protected time I need in order to be successful at achieving these goals. Next, what additional training do you need? And then how's that additional training going to help you meet your long-term career goals? You see how this is like a little story? The little story is, I'm really good at this, but if I could just get some more training, then I could do this other thing. Next. Yeah, remember that it's a transition award. So you need to reflect it. I mean, unfortunately, it's kind of a balance you're going to have to make in writing this thing between saying, I need to gain skills, but also looking like you're competent. You don't want to look like, I don't know how to do anything. I know how to do these things. I'm really good at these things. What I need to do is gain some skills in this, this, and this. Next slide. So the career development training part, what will you accomplish with the research, and what are you going to learn in the research in the course of the award? Next. What additional training are you going to, take a course, whatever? What new skills? How will you assess your progress? And this is one thing they really look for, what are the milestones? Or, are they going to be publications? How do we know that you're making progress and how that you have a plan? Again, this is a whole lot about, do you have a plan? And I think you do have a plan. So, you just have to, provide specific examples. And, something like, how are you going to be evaluated by the mentoring team? Are you going to meet with them weekly, monthly, et cetera? What are your milestones? What is your timeline? And again, we're going to put a timeline at the end of this training, this whole description of your career development. Next slide. Training in the responsible conduct of research required. I'm just going to kind of leave it at that. Most schools have something you're going to take. You've all had to take city training, so make sure that you include that as one, and they want to know how much time. What is the format of the training? How much time does it take? And you can always add in things like, I'm going to, take this course. I will discuss ethical issues with my mentor, blah, blah, blah. Next slide. So if you don't have responsible conduct training in there, you're in trouble. All right. The institutional commitment letter from your department chair, division chief, get as many letters as you can. Really? I mean, unless everyone at your school hates you, you draft a letter. I'm trying to get this grant award. And the trick is, if you draft the letters, it not only means that busy people will be able to do this, but also you can make sure that the letters don't all say the same thing. So the people that, like your section chief or your division chief probably knows you really well. You should say something, in there. We think that this person is excellent, at diagnostics, or, say something about you personally in addition to saying how the institution's committed and that we'll rearrange the call schedule or something, you know, where it looks like you really have a commitment. The dean, on the other hand, is going to say something like, you know, this is a promising new faculty. We really want them to grow and to bloom and blossom in academics, et cetera. So you want to make sure that you make it clear, you know, your position and the protection of research time, that they confirm that you have, you know, if you get this award, you will have the protected time you need. Next slide. All right, statement from the mentor. So the primary mentor, most people are going to have one primary mentor, maybe somebody you're already working with, and this is a very senior person, and hopefully is somebody you may have published with already. Next slide. Now, this could be the person with the NIH funding, it might not be. Prior evidence of mentoring experience and success. That's very important, that they say that in their letter and that they say that in their bio sketch. Researcher in the field you're proposing to work. Well, duh. Able to support your project with financially and with time, and, you know, say something about how they're going to meet with you and mentor you. The co-mentors, and you can have multiple co-mentors. It just depends on how many different things you need to learn. So these could be co-mentors who complement the primary mentor's strengths. They may have different expertise. Like I said, if you have expertise in genetics, and you want to learn some bioinformatics, then your co-mentor might be a bioinformatics person. You establish your mentoring team, 3 or 4 members. Indicate the frequency you're going to meet with them. Each person on the team should have a clear role that's in your plan and your research plan. So when you write your research plan, if you have a component, you know, aim 1 is to collect 100 samples from patients coming in with blah, 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 blah. Parenthetically, after that, you're going to put the name of the mentor that's going to help you with that goal. And maybe 2 of the mentors are going to work together. You can put them both in there parenthetically. Again, make it clear and organized that you have a plan for this. Okay, next. The research plan. So the research plan is, what am I going to do? You know, the actual research, not the training. So you have a specific aims page, which is 1 page. When it's kind of the big map of your project, and then you have your research strategy where you talk about the significance of the research, the innovation, and then the approach. What am I going to do? Next slide. So your research plan needs to include, you know, what your project is about, a description of the relationship between the mentor and the candidate, research. So I've been working with Dr. So-and-so, he's a world expert on this, but I'm only interested in this one part or whatever. The focus of the K23 is patient-centered outcomes research, but complementary lab research might happen, you know. So again, make sure that you make it clear which parts of the research are going to happen when. If you do K23, you better make sure that you have a power analysis. I don't know how many times I've looked at somebody going to do a clinical trial and they go, yeah, we're going to see some patients. How many? What's reasonable? What's real? Next slide. Creative but feasible and achievable, okay? They are not looking for you to cure cancer or to sequence the genome. They are looking for you to do something that is reasonable where you are and who you are, and that is going to add to our understanding of this disease or this field. You're going to utilize the expertise of your mentors, so you're not just adding them on for window dressing. And again, how many different times am I going to say? Provides you with new skills. What is the new thing you're going to learn? All right, next. Now, in the significance section, you need to have two things. One is going to be the significance, of course, of the disease that you're interested in. And secondly is what is not known in the field. You know, that's what this strengths and weaknesses. What we know in the field is this. What's not known is this. I'm going to try to figure out this, the unknown part. So that's where you need to be sure to kind of also make sure you lead the reviewer by the hand. And by that I mean K awards are not going to be reviewed by experts in the exact field you work in because they don't know which K awards are coming in, except if you've talked to your program officer, and then they'll make sure that someone's on study section who understands your science. So another good reason to talk to the program officer. Anyway, you want to make sure that you very clearly articulate. Don't just use abbreviations and things and assume, oh, well, any endocrinologist would know this. Right. What if there's not an endocrinologist reading it? So, you know, make sure it's very, very clear. And again, in the significance, it's not just saying, you know, cancer kills lots of people and I want to study cancer. It's cancer kills lots of people. What we know about childhood rhabdomyosarcoma is blank. What we don't know is blank, and our study is designed to try to figure out this part of that unknown. Next slide. So the approach needs to include described experimental design, what are you going to do, and how you're going to achieve and get unbiased results. And this is an important new requirement that you explain how relevant biological variables such as gender, ethnicity, anything might be, and that you're not going to, especially if you're using animals, if you were doing a KOAT and you want to use an animal model. You can't just say, I want all male Sprague Dawley rats. Now you need to justify why you are picking male Sprague Dawley rats, and maybe it's because you're studying testicular cancer, and only those rats will have it. But you need to very clearly justify that now as part of what's called the rigor and reproducibility requirement. Next slide. Okay, other sections, the cover letter. Now, again, you're going to have mentors, but you also are going to have reference letters. And the reference letters go in there, you don't see them, so you can't write them. Well, you could, might not be good. Those are going to be available. Your bio-sketch, your budget, you're not going to do the budget. Some business manager person's going to hopefully do that. Enrollment table if you're doing human subjects. Animals, here's the key thing. If you are doing something with animals, in the animal section, make a table that clearly describes, let's say you're doing crosses, you're going to do a flox cree, and you're doing these crosses, and you're going to make knockouts. How many of flox, how many cree, how many pups, you know, so that in a table form, which is a little bigger than what you might put in your description in the actual research part. But that's the key. These sections, the animals, human subjects, enrollment, budget, those don't count in your page limit. So, you know, you can describe, you know, we're going to do a flox cree and we're going to back cross, blah, 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 for more details. See animals section, okay? That's a little trick I learned. Next slide. All right, the NIH salary contribution. The purpose of the notice is, you know, there's a maximum, and that's different from one institute to the next. And it's also different depending on your specialty. So for most, the K-Series is supposed to cover 75% of your base salary. But they also have a cap. If you're a surgeon, they cover only 50%. And the reason is they believe that surgical scientists, surgical researchers need to keep up their surgical skills. So I think that's a good idea. So you need to check with the institute, which means talk to the program officer. Next slide. So I put this in here just to remind everybody, when you're describing this research that you want to do, you don't have to say it all in big, complicated words. You know, you can say things relatively straightforward. And if you can't explain it simply, you may have problems with getting a review back that shows that the study section doesn't really understand what it is you want to do. And you can get mad at the study section when you get that, but it won't help because it's really your fault. The onus is on you to make sure that most people with some science background can read your grant and understand what you want to do and why it's important. Next slide. So again, what's unique about CASE is the fact that the candidate and the career plan are a huge part of what's scored. I can't tell you how many people I've counseled who got a bad score on a grant, and they come to me and they say, I got a bad score on the grant, and I look at, and they have like 2 pages or, you know, 1 page for the whole career development plan. I'm like, are you kidding? So you want to make sure that you take time with the candidate and career plan. The mentors, make sure that the mentors really spell out 2 things, their expertise, well, I guess 3 things, their track record of training people, and what exactly they see themselves doing with you. I reviewed a grant once where the primary mentor letter described a project that wasn't the project that was in the grant. And we all went like, what the heck? So we don't know if the mentor cut and pasted wrong or whatever, but it was just wrong. It was a mess. So you want to make sure that those 3 things are articulated in the bio sketch of the mentor and in their letter. Next. Common mistakes, lack of strategy. Oh, I didn't know that 0% of KOATs were funded last year. Lack of time to prepare. This takes a lot more time than you think it will, and it is boring, some parts of it. And it's tedious. So make sure you start early. And when you get stuck when you're writing and you can't, kind of get writer's block on one part, go work on something that's very straightforward. Make sure you get, and make yourself a little checklist. I still have a grant that I had. When I opened up the folder, in was a little scribbled piece of paper, but I had all the parts I needed, and I had checked them off. I was like, oh, yeah, the checklist. The candidate section, make sure that it's adequate. The career goals are very concise, and make sure that you have the mentor letters. Next slide. Timeline. At least 6 months before your submission date. So the 3 K-Series submission dates are February 12th, June 12th, October 12th. So 6 months before that, you need to start. Print and highlight the instructions. Print the guidelines for reviewers. A lot of people don't do this. It's online. People don't review grants just willy-nilly. There's a specific set of things that we are asked to score. Guess what? If you look at that list, I bet you could address it. And when I read a grant that I can tell somebody knew what I have to score because they put it in the grant, I think they are genius, and I give them a good score. Just saying. So make sure that you go and find those guidelines. Be sure you talk to the university grants office about what their deadlines are, because the last thing you want is to run up against that deadline and you've worked for 6 months to put something together. Now you have to wait another 3 or 4 months. Next slide. Strategy. Next slide. Oh, yes. Another thing that you should probably try to look at is the NIH Reporter. So the NIH Reporter is a database of all the funded grants. And going back, so you can go back in time or you can just look at the currently funded. So let's say you want to write a K23 to NHLBI. and you're interested in hemophilia. So go in, you can pick NHLBI, you can put in K23 and just put in the hashtag, and then put in hemophilia as your search word. And you can find out if any other KO people have gotten that. You can look at it any way you want. You can search for just the K23s in hemophilia. You could search for just research on hemophilia, which I don't recommend because there'll be thousands. But you can use this any way you want. And y'all, once again, this thing is great when you go to interview for jobs. Before you go, you pull up all the grants that are at that school. What are they looking? Who's got the money is who's making the rules. So you can find out who's working on what and who you, so you come in and you say, well, I understand Dr. So-and-so studies traumatic brain injury, and I think we could collaborate. People think you're a genius. Plus, it'll give you a good idea of the lay of the land. So the reporter is awesome. And again, all you have to do, I think it's a hyperlink in my slides, but if you go to nih.gov and type in reporter, it'll bring you to this database. Next slide. And so this is the kind of search results. I put mine in just so that you can see that I don't just talk about grants. I actually have some grants, but also so you see what the results are. And when you click on these, they'll bring up an abstract, which is public information about the project. They'll bring up the budget, and they'll bring up the information, the contact information for the PI. So let's say somebody's doing a K23 on hemophilia and they have a KOAT, and they have a mouse model, and you want to do a K23 with a clinical trial in humans. You might want to collaborate with them. There might be something you have in common. Now you actually know somebody's name and you could contact them. Next slide.
Hold on, Paula. I just want to clarify the medical student alcohol research internship. Did you want to tell people that doesn't mean they're all getting drunk on your campus?
Well, it is New Orleans.
Just wanted to make that quick comment because I always chuckle when I see that slide. Sorry.
It is New Orleans. So what can I say? All right, career development plan. Once again, what's the plan? And again, everything doesn't have to be set in stone, you guys. You know, it's a plan. It should have some flexibility. But if you just kind of say, you know, do a little hand waving, I'm going to take some courses and talk to some people, nobody's going to believe that. They really want to have a very specific idea. So maybe you say you're going to go take a course at NIH, and maybe you don't end up taking it. That's not as important as the fact that you actually found the name of the course, you know when it's offered, and you put it into your plan. Next slide. All right, so again, succinctly stating what your career goals and objectives are, you know, your long-term goal, and then what are your goals for this award, and then next, the candidate part, sell yourself. Again, do not just reiterate what's in your bio-sketch. Maybe it's in your bio-sketch that you know, with honors and awards. So you won the so-and-so resident award, which allowed you to go to the international meeting of blah, 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 society. And that's where I met Dr. So-and-so, who I'm now working with. You know, that's a whole lot more interesting and informative of how you got into your field than just saying, I won an award at such and such school, blah, 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 blah. All right, next. And I show this one because I think that this is, again, very succinct, but you see this one thing at the top? This little blue band at the top of the page. She has a blue band. I've seen people do it in black with white letters for each section. Do you know how nice that is to, when you're reading and you have 20 of these that you have to read, to be able to find the section? It's a little tiny thing, but it's huge when you're the reviewer. All right, so this one, she has her career goals, become established clinician scientist, blah, blah, blah. And she wants to do that by A, gaining expertise, blah, blah, blah. Okay? All right, so next slide. So your education and activities, again, be specific, give the course number, conferences, seminars, whatever. Next slide. Again, what are the review criteria that the reviewers, does the candidate have the potential to develop and become independent and productive? And by productive, have you been productive in the past? Well, they don't know how many patients you've seen, but they can look and see on your biosketch how many papers you've published. Oh, you published 1 paper as a med student, 2 papers as an intern, 3 papers or 4 papers and gave a talk as a fellow. That's what they want to see. Is your academic, clinical, or research record of high quality? Is there evidence a candidate's commitment to meet the program objectives? Do the letters of reference address these review criteria? So you can make sure that you tell the mentors and the reviewers, the referees, make sure you say something about my potential and how many papers I've got. Or maybe sometimes how many papers you don't have. So I had someone who said in his candidate part, I don't have any papers as first author. That's because Francis Collins is the first author on these papers. So I'm third author, and I'm really proud of it. If there's something that might be a weakness in your background or your biosketch, they're going to see it, so you might as well address it if you can. Next slide. Here we have an education and activity plan, what are the trainings, some courses, hands-on work with Dr. So-and-so, et cetera. So again, it just looks real. Next slide. And a timeline. So everything from, coursework to mentoring committee meetings, when you get in your responsible conduct training, when you're going to accomplish aim 1, aim 2, when you're going to get some papers coming out, et cetera. All right, next slide. I like this timeline a little better, even though unfortunately it's a little smaller. But she has her scientific aims up at the top, and she kind of described each aim. Within aim 2, I'm going to do this experiment, this experiment, this experiment. And then describe the manuscripts that she sees coming out of them, meetings she's going to attend, mentoring, progress and evaluation, quarterly progress or whatever. So I think a timeline like this with colors is better, and it's critical. You have to put a timeline in because it shows people you have a plan. Again, everything on here might not happen, but at least you had a plan. Next slide. All right, here's the review criteria for the career goals. Again, are the candidates' prior training and research appropriate, et cetera, et cetera. So make sure you look at these before or after you write your career goals and go, no, maybe I need to change it in order to address these review criteria. Next slide. All right, mentors, key component. Next slide. So the mentor letter has to tie in with your personal statement and career development. Again, the personal statement of the mentor. He needs to say 3 things. Who is he and what's his expertise, which is in this second paragraph. In particular, in the third paragraph, he describes how he's going to work with the mentee, and in the 4th paragraph, he describes how he's committed to training and mentoring. Next slide. And some people will kind of lay out with their mentoring committee who they are, what their position is, what their funding or what their expertise is, or what part of the project they're going to help with. I believe in your career development training plan, it's a good place to introduce with 1 or 2 lines each of your mentors. Dr. So-and-so has expertise in this and is going to help me with this. Next slide. And then the mentor personal statement, which is that first thing that they have to have on their biosketch, should kind of reiterate what we just said. what's my background is in such and such research. I'm going to work with this person doing such and such, and I'm committed to training. I've trained a bunch of people. Next slide. Yeah, right there. And then here's the review criteria for the mentors. So again, make sure you look at these. These are straight, like cut and pasted, straight off the guidelines. Next slide. Edit. Everybody says the more people that look at it, the better. Not so much. You do need input from multiple people, but too many cooks spoil the pot, or whatever they say. So I would make sure that you get feedback from people. Part of that is getting this stuff written early. I help lots of people here at my university with their career development plan. I'm happy to take a look at somebody's career development plan or to send you good examples, but editing and editing and editing. Next slide. Okay, that's the last slide. The other thing, the last thing, and I will send this to Deborah because I forgot to include it. 2 weeks ago, so this is hot. This is hot. NIAID, which is the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, who has some sample grants, complete grants, on the NIH webpage, they included a K award. I think it's a K23. And the summary statement. So you see what the reviewers thought of the grant, which happened to get a 1.0 or a 10 or a 1, whichever way you want to look at it, a perfect score. So it's a great, even though it's about infectious disease and it's not necessarily your, what you're working on, you can see the way that somebody wrote the parts of the grant and how they put, kind of put their whole thing together. So that's my last thing, because I want to make sure we have a few minutes for questions.
So if anyone has questions, go ahead, unmute yourself and go for it.
I have a question. This is Laura Adang. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes.
I was just wondering how and when we should address a deceleration of career secondary to children during training.
Oh, so I had someone, a PhD, who had to address that because there's like a little gap in her biosketch. And what she said was, for 2 years, I stayed home with my kids, and that provided me with some great managerial experience and mentoring. So I think everybody realizes that, something, again, if there's a gap in your timeline, you're going to need to address it because the reviewers are going to say what happened, and they'll ding you on it. And if you address it and they don't like the way you addressed it, well, that's tough. At least you tried. So I do think, you have to say something about how, you may have taken some time off for that, and supposedly they can't ding you for it.
Okay, Paula, what if they didn't take time off officially, like a year or two, but they just had to slow down their kind of progress? Any comments on that, or should they comment on that, or should they leave that out?
I don't think that I would comment on it, but it might be something, if you were working with that mentor, one of your mentors, the mentor might write in his letter, Sarah didn't get as many papers during the first 2 years she worked with me because she spent more time with her kids, and now she's really ramping up her productivity or something like that. So that, sometimes the candidate should address the deficit, so to speak, and sometimes you can put it and have the mentor address it.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I like that. Other questions?
Everybody's too hungry.
I know.
They missed their lunch.
Emailed in earlier, and I think that we kind of answered this, but since it was emailed in, I'll ask it. When they're looking for outside mentors, what's the best way to approach someone who might not be your direct mentor, and how do you kind of negotiate between multiple mentors? Any input?
Yeah, so I think, one of the best ways is if you find somebody that looks like a good candidate, but maybe you don't know them, try to meet up with them in person at a meeting. You know, so you could email them, tell them that you're thinking about this K, and, you know, most people are pretty happy to mentor somebody, but they want to know, what exactly do you need from me, right? So I think if there's a way, because if you can make, the more you can make this mentoring relationship for each of the mentors look like it's real. We've published a paper together, or we presented an abstract together, whatever, then it looks like you really have somebody who knows you and is mentoring you versus just kind of window dressing somebody who sounds good but has never heard of you. Or worse, the one writing the wrong letter.
Yeah, that's tacky. The other thing is, if anyone on this call needs a mentor in a field that they're not quite sure who to approach, feel free to shoot me an email. I'll take it to the RDCR and Education Committee and see if there's someone who could help you. I know that last year and the year before, we actually had people that ended up going and spending a week in someone else's lab to learn a technique, just because we found someone who knew someone who knew someone to get that technique for people. So if you find that you're getting stumped on this, let me know. Talk to me, and we'll see if we can find spots for you too.
Exactly.
Paula, I know that you're probably starving to death, and I cannot thank you enough, as always. It was so fun. Thank you so much. And for everyone on the call, this is fun. And for everyone on the call, next is BioSketches. So go online and
ties right in.
BioSketches. Go watch the video on BioSketches, and our next call will be on BioSketches. I'll send out a reminder tomorrow when this link is up, as well as I'll have a list of all of the people this year and a one-line description of their research. So thank you all, and Paula, as always, thank you so much, and I owe you dinner next time I see you. How's that sound?
I'm going to collect.
You better.
Thank you, guys.
Okay. Bye all. Have a great day. Bye, guys.